I never thought I'd be anyone's secret. Then I met him, charismatic, wealthy, and supposedly in love with me. For 3 years, I was his shadow lover. What I didn't know was that while he whispered forever to me, he was planning a future with someone else. They say love is blind, but in my case, it wasn't just blind, it was hidden. My name is Amara, and 3 years ago, I became the secret that someone rich and powerful kept tucked away from the world. Have you ever felt like you were living in the shadows of someone else's life? That's where my story begins. Not in the spotlight where I deserve to be, but in the carefully maintained darkness of a relationship that was never meant to see the light of day. I met James at a charity gala in Chicago. I was working as an event coordinator, making sure everything ran smoothly behind the scenes. He was a keynote speaker, charismatic, confident, and worth more money than I could comprehend. Our eyes met across the room, and something electric passed between us. By the end of the night, he had my number. By the end of the week, he had my heart. The first few months were a whirlwind, private jets to secluded beaches, candlelit dinners in hotel suites with views that took my breath away, passionate nights wrapped in $1,000 sheets. But there was always this condition. Our relationship existed in bubbles of privacy, never spilling into public view. "It's complicated," he'd say, running his fingers through my curls. "The media watches my every move. My business partners scrutinize my personal life. I just want something real, something that's just ours." And I'd nod, understanding, or thinking I understood. Looking back, the signs were everywhere. The separate arrivals and departures. The way his voice would drop to a whisper when he took calls around me. How I never met his family, his friends, his business associates. I was introduced to hotel staff as his colleague or friend. I became an expert at slipping in and out of places unnoticed, like a ghost in his life. But love makes you accept things you shouldn't. It whispers justifications in your ear when doubt creeps in. He's protecting us, I told myself. This intensity, this connection, it needs shelter from the world's judgment. For 3 years, I lived for stolen moments and midnight calls. I celebrated birthdays in hotel rooms and spent holidays alone, waiting for a message saying he could slip away to see me. I convinced myself this was enough, that I was enough, even as I was being erased from his public narrative. Then came the day I saw the announcement, the day everything I thought I knew shattered like fine crystal hitting concrete. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Stay with me through this journey of love, betrayal, and ultimately finding my worth, because what happened next changed everything. This isn't just my story. It's for anyone who's ever compromised their visibility for someone else's comfort. For anyone who's ever been told they're special, but not special enough to acknowledge in the light. This is about what happens when you finally step out of the shadows. That first night at the charity gala still plays in my mind like a movie. I was adjusting the placement cards at the VIP table when he approached. James Westbrook, tech mogul, venture capitalist, philanthropist. A man whose face I'd seen in business magazines but never expected to meet in person. "You've been watching me all night," he said with a smile that made the room tilt slightly. I remember laughing, telling him he had it backwards. But he was right. Something about him had caught my attention from the moment he walked in. Not just his obvious wealth or the way people gravitated toward him, but something deeper in his eyes. A loneliness that mirrored my own. We talked until the catering staff began breaking down tables. About books we loved, places we'd traveled, dreams we still carried. Not once did he drop names or flaunt his status. He listened to me. Really listened, in a way that made me feel seen for perhaps the first time in my life. The text came the next morning. Dinner that night at a small, exclusive restaurant tucked away in a neighborhood I couldn't afford to live in. I told myself it was just dinner, just curiosity. I never intended for my heart to get involved. 3 weeks later, He flew me to his private island for the weekend. We walked barefoot on pristine beaches that felt untouched by time. Under a blanket of stars, he told me about the pressure of his world, the constant performance, the piranha-like business associates, the relationships that always seemed to come with ulterior motives. "With you," he whispered against my hair, "I don't have to be anyone but myself." That became our pattern, intense, intimate time together in carefully curated privacy, followed by distance that left me aching. I learned to pack overnight bags that didn't look like overnight bags. I practiced casual responses for when I needed to suddenly cancel plans with friends. I became skilled at hiding my disappointment when holidays approached, and I knew I'd be celebrating alone. The first real red flag came 6 months in. We were having dinner at his penthouse when his phone rang. He stepped onto the balcony to take it, but I could see his body language change, stiffer, more formal. When he returned, he said he had an emergency meeting. As I gathered my things, I noticed he'd already called his driver to take me home through the service entrance. "It's just easier this way," he explained, kissing my forehead. "People talk." I swallowed my questions along with my pride. Who were these people? Why did their talk matter more than my dignity? But the words never left my mouth. Instead, I nodded and slipped away as instructed. There were other signs too. The way he never posted photos of us together, while his social media showcased every other aspect of his life. How he introduced me by my first name, only when we occasionally ran into acquaintances. The absence of any label to define what I was to him. The sudden business trips that coincided with major social events, where his presence would be photographed and documented. I rationalized it all. He valued privacy in a world where privacy was currency. His high profile meant discretion was necessary. He was protecting me from media scrutiny. Our connection was too sacred, too pure to be displayed for public consumption. "You understand, don't you?" he'd ask, his eyes holding mine with an intensity that made my doubts seem petty. "What we have is just for us." And I did understand, or convinced myself I did. Because when we were together, the world outside ceased to exist. In those precious hours, I wasn't his secret. I was his everything. As months turned into a year, and then 2, James became the center of my universe. The pattern of our relationship settled into something that felt almost normal. If normal could be defined by encrypted text messages and memorized security codes to private elevators. Despite the secrecy, or maybe because of it, our connection deepened in ways I hadn't experienced before. In the sanctuaries we created, hotel suites, his various properties, remote destinations, we shared parts of ourselves few others had seen. I told him about my mother's battle with addiction, my childhood spent bouncing between relatives' homes, the scholarship that had finally given me a chance at stability. He confided in me about his own wounds, the father who measured love in achievements, the previous relationships that had left him skeptical of genuine connection. "You're different," he'd say, tracing the outline of my face in the half-light of dawn. "You see me, not what I can do for you." In those moments, the restrictions he placed on our relationship seemed like a small price to pay. After all, wasn't every relationship a series of compromises? We developed rituals that sustained us. Sunday mornings spent reading the newspaper in bed, his fingers absent-mindedly playing with my curls. Cooking elaborate meals together in the massive kitchen of whichever property we were staying in. Late-night conversations that wandered from childhood memories to philosophical debates about the nature of happiness. I'd never felt so intellectually and emotionally matched with someone. The promises started in the second year, whispered at first, then spoken with increasing conviction. "One day we won't need to hide," he'd say. "I'm working toward a future where we can be together openly." "I'm restructuring some business holdings," he explained another time. "Once that's complete, the scrutiny will be less intense. When the time is right, I want to show you off to the world," he assured me after I'd watched him attend yet another high-profile event with a business associate on his arm. I clung to these promises like lifelines. They became the foundation for the elaborate castle of justifications I built in my mind. Yes, our relationship existed in the shadows, but only temporarily. Yes, I was a secret, but a cherished one. Yes, I was missing holidays with family and lying to friends, but for a greater future payoff. The deeper we got, the more the disparity between our public and private lives began to wear on me. I became a master of compartmentalization. There was Amara, who existed in the real world, the event coordinator with a small circle of increasingly distant friends, the daughter who made excuses for missing family gatherings, the woman who smiled vaguely when co-workers discussed their weekend plans. Then, there was Amara who existed only with James, passionate, seen, valued. "I'm tired of pretending you don't matter to me," I finally admitted one night, tears slipping down my cheeks as we lay in the darkness of his Seattle penthouse. "I'm tired of being your ghost." He gathered me close, his heartbeat steady against my ear. "You're not my ghost," he whispered fiercely. "You're my heart, my future. Everything else is just logistics." Logistics, such a clinical word for what felt like erasure. But then he would do something that rekindled my hope. A custom-designed piece of jewelry that referenced an inside joke. A rare first edition of my favorite book. A property purchased in a location I'd once mentioned loving, with an offhand comment about it being our place someday. The cognitive dissonance was exhausting. In private, I was the most important person in his world. In public, I didn't exist at all. My friends had stopped asking about my dating life. My mother had given up on me bringing someone home for the holidays. Still, when doubts crept in during the long nights alone, I'd remember the look in his eyes when he spoke about our future. The way he held me like I was precious. The vulnerability he showed only to me. "Just a little longer," became our mantra. Just a little more patience. And patience I had in abundance. What I was running out of was self-respect. It's strange how your world can shatter in the most ordinary moments. Mine collapsed on a Tuesday afternoon while standing in line for coffee. I was scrolling through my phone, half listening to the mundane cafe chatter around me, when a headline stopped my thumb mid-swipe. Tech billionaire James Westbrook engaged to socialite Victoria Hammond. The words didn't make sense at first. They were just random syllables arranged in an order that couldn't possibly be correct. I tapped the article, certain there had been some mistake. Then I saw the photo. James on one knee in front of a stunning blonde woman, surrounded by roses on the deck of his yacht. The same yacht where he and I had spent my birthday just 3 weeks earlier. My coffee order was called. Somehow I managed to take it, to walk outside, to find a bench before my legs gave out. The engagement had happened over the weekend, according to the article. While I'd been working late, thinking he was in Tokyo closing a business deal. While I'd been sending him messages saying I missed him. While I'd been planning the intimate dinner I would cook for him when he returned. 3 years of my life reduced to a footnote that didn't even exist in his story. I don't remember getting home. I do remember sitting on my bathroom floor, phone clutched in my hand, cycling through disbelief, denial, rage, and crushing pain. I called him 17 times, sent messages that evolved from confused to desperate to furious. The silence that answered me was deafening. When he finally called back, it was after midnight. His voice was controlled, measured, the voice he used for business calls, not the warm tones reserved for our private moments. "I was going to tell you," he said. "I just needed to find the right way." The right way? My laugh sounded foreign to my own ears. "Maybe before you bought the ring? Before you planned an elaborate proposal? Before you let me find out from a news article like everyone else?" He sighed, a sound so familiar it made my chest ache. "It's complicated, Amara." "Then uncomplicate it for me," I demanded. Make me understand how you could whisper promises about our future while planning one with someone else. The explanation, when it came, was worse than anything I'd imagined. Victoria was appropriate, from the right family, with the right connections. Their relationship made strategic sense for his business interests and social standing. It had been in development for nearly as long as he and I had been together. But what we have is real, he insisted, voice finally cracking with emotion. What I feel for you, it's different. Different how? I asked, my voice hollow. With her, it's about what makes sense. With you, it's about what I feel. In that moment, everything became blindingly clear. I wasn't the secret love he was protecting from the world. I was the affair, the distraction, the emotional outlet that made his calculated life decisions bearable. So I was never going to be enough, I whispered. Not a question. His silence was my answer. The days that followed exist in my memory as a blur of tissue boxes and unanswered phone calls. Friends I'd neglected for years rallied around me, piecing together the extent of my deception from my fragmented explanations. My mother arrived unannounced with home-cooked food and quiet understanding. James alternated between silence and desperate attempts to maintain our connection. Floral arrangements appeared at my door with cards, promising nothing had to change. "We can continue what we have," he wrote. "She doesn't make me feel what you do." The flowers went into the trash. But his words, they burrowed deep into my consciousness, raising questions that kept me awake at night. Had there been signs I missed? Had I willingly blinded myself? How many other women had there been? How many others had believed they were special, different, worth eventually acknowledging? The engagement dominated social media and business news. Each new photo was a fresh laceration on my already bleeding heart. The diamond on her finger could have paid my rent for years. The smile on his face looked genuine, the same smile I'd believed belonged only to moments with me. The most devastating realization wasn't that he had chosen someone else. It was that he had never been choosing at all. I had never been an option for the life he intended to build. I had simply been a beautiful detour he enjoyed taking along the way. Grief has its own timeline, its own cruel rhythm that refuses to be rushed. In the weeks following my discovery, I moved through the world like a ghost, showing up for work, going through motions, but never fully present. The woman in the mirror was a stranger to me, hollow-eyed, diminished, haunted by questions that had no satisfying answers. The worst part wasn't losing James, it was losing myself. Somewhere in those 3 years, I had become a supporting character in my own life story. I had molded myself around his absences, his rules, his timeline. I had measured my worth by the crumbs of attention he offered. Who was I without that framework? What did I want when there was no one else's schedule to accommodate? I'd like to say I cut him off cleanly, but grief is rarely that tidy. There were moments of weakness, late-night calls I shouldn't have answered, messages I should have left unread, desperate attempts to understand what had been real and what had been illusion. "I never meant to hurt you," he said during one of these calls, his voice thick with what sounded like genuine remorse. "I meant everything I said when we were together." "Then why her?" I asked, the question that haunted me most. Why the engagement? Why the public life with someone else while I waited in the wings? His answer was as honest as it was devastating. "Because she fits the life I'm expected to have. The board, my investors, my family, there are expectations, obligations." And I was just, what? The escape from those obligations. My voice broke on the words. "You were the life I wanted," he whispered, "just not the one I could choose." I hung up and broke down on my kitchen floor, surrounded by delivery containers from food I couldn't taste, and sympathy cards from friends who couldn't possibly understand. The life he wanted but couldn't choose. As if love were a luxury item his wealth somehow couldn't afford. The engagement period dragged on like a slow-motion car crash I couldn't look away from. Their faces appeared on business magazines, society pages, social media feeds. Power couple set to merge tech and old money, one headline declared. Each new photo op was choreographed to perfection, Victoria's studied elegance complementing his polished charisma. I wondered if she knew about me, if there were others like me, if she too compromised pieces of herself to fit the narrative they were creating together. The wedding date was announced for June, a lavish ceremony at his vineyard estate. The same vineyard where he'd once described a future where we might retire, growing old among the grapevines, away from the world's demands. Another promise revealed as fantasy. Despite my friend's concerns, I tortured myself by following the wedding preparations online, the designer dress fittings, the celebrity guest list, the elaborate security measures to ensure privacy. The irony wasn't lost on me. His marriage would be a public spectacle, while our relationship had required absolute secrecy. In my darkest moments, I drafted emails I never sent, considered calling Victoria, showing her texts, proving my existence, fantasized about showing up at the ceremony during that pivotal speak now or forever, hold your peace moment. But what would that accomplish beyond more pain? The truth was, he had made his choice long before he ever met me. I had just been too blind to see it. 2 weeks before the wedding, a small package arrived at my apartment. Inside was a delicate gold bracelet we had seen together in Barcelona, with a simple note. What we had was real. I'm sorry it couldn't be everything. Jay. I stood at my kitchen sink, the bracelet dangling from my fingers, torn between throwing it away and clasping it to my chest. In the end, I did neither. I placed it in a box with other mementos of our time together, photos, ticket stubs, handwritten notes, and pushed it to the back of my closet. Not quite able to discard it, not healthy to keep it visible. The wedding day arrived with beautiful weather and breathless media coverage. I spent it in bed, phone turned off, curtains drawn, a bottle of wine my only companion. I had hit rock bottom, mourning not just a relationship, but the years I had given away, the dignity I had sacrificed, the self I had lost in the process of loving someone who had never intended to love me completely. That night, staring at my ceiling in the darkness, a single question formed with perfect clarity. When had I decided I deserved so little? They say rock bottom has a gift. It shows you who you really are when everything else is stripped away. The morning after the wedding, I woke up with swollen eyes and an unexpected clarity. I'd spent 3 years as someone's shadow. It was time to step into my own light. I started small. A therapist who didn't flinch when I unraveled the tangled web of my relationship with James. A journal where I poured out uncensored thoughts that had no other safe place to exist. Long walks alone where I reacquainted myself with the woman I'd been before, and caught glimpses of who I might become. You're experiencing something similar to cult deprogramming, my therapist explained during one session. When someone isolates you and becomes the center of your reality, you lose perspective, your boundaries blur, your sense of normal distorts. Those words were both painful and freeing. I hadn't simply made poor romantic choices. I'd been systematically conditioned to accept less than I deserved, to mistake crumbs for feasts, to see restrictions as protection rather than control. I reconnected with friends I'd neglected, confessing the full truth about where I'd been disappearing to for all those years. Their responses surprised me. Not judgment, but recognition. So many women had similar stories. Perhaps not with billionaires or secret relationships quite so dramatic, but the pattern was disturbingly familiar. Capable, intelligent women accepting partial love as though it were a privilege rather than a deprivation. I kept thinking I was special, I admitted during a wine night with my oldest friends. That our connection was so unique, it justified the secrecy. We all think that, my friend Tasha replied, refilling my glass. That's how they get us. But honey, real love doesn't hide you. It celebrates you. 6 months after the wedding, I quit my job and started my own event planning business. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent years organizing perfect moments for others, while accepting a deeply imperfect situation for myself. Now, I was reclaiming that expertise for my own benefit. I learned to sleep alone again, to enjoy meals without checking my phone every 5 minutes, to make plans without leaving mysterious gaps for potential last-minute meetups. Small victories that slowly rebuilt my sense of self. The hardest lesson was learning to recognize the patterns, how I'd been drawn to unavailability, how I'd mistaken intensity for intimacy, how I'd interpreted his jealous control as proof of passion rather than insecurity, how I'd accepted the narrative that I needed to earn visibility in his life, rather than demanding it as a basic requirement. I won't pretend there weren't setbacks, nights when memories ambushed me, and I found myself scrolling through old messages, days when news of James and Victoria's perfect life together sent me spiraling into comparison and self-doubt. Moments of weakness when I drafted messages I thankfully never sent. But healing isn't linear. It's messy and inconsistent and sometimes feels like taking 2 steps backward for every step forward. The difference was that now I recognized the backward steps for what they were instead of mistaking them for progress. A year after the wedding, I received an email from James. He and Victoria were expecting their first child. He wanted me to hear it from him rather than seeing it online. "I think about you often," he wrote. "I hope you're finding happiness." I stared at those words for a long time, searching for the ache they would have triggered months earlier. Instead, I felt a strange lightness. His life was continuing along its prescribed path. And for the first time, I was genuinely grateful not to be part of it. I didn't respond, not out of bitterness or lingering pain, but because some doors are meant to stay closed. Some chapters need definitive endings. My own story was still unfolding. My business was thriving. I'd started dating again, cautiously, intentionally, with boundaries firmly in place. I'd developed a radar for red flags that once would have looked like romance to me. Most importantly, I'd reclaimed my voice, the one that had gone silent every time he'd asked me to accept less than I deserved. The greatest revelation wasn't that James had been wrong for me. It was that I had been wrong for myself. I had abandoned my own needs, my own worth, my own light. The journey back to self-love proved far more challenging than trying to earn his. But standing in that light, I finally understood. I had never been someone's secret. I had been my own. 2 years have passed since I found out about James's engagement. Sometimes it feels like another lifetime, a story that happened to someone else. Other days, certain songs or scents can transport me back to those hidden moments, and I have to remind myself how far I've come. People often ask if I regret those 3 years. The honest answer is both yes and no. I regret losing myself in someone else's narrative. I regret accepting invisibility as the price of admission to love. But I don't regret the lessons those years taught me, painful as they were to learn. James and Victoria welcomed their second child last month. I saw the announcement online and felt nothing but a distant wish for that child's happiness. The power he once held over my emotions has faded like an old photograph left too long in the sun. My own life has expanded in ways I never imagined when I was living in the margins of his. My business now employs a team of women, many of whom have their own stories of recovering from relationships that diminished rather than elevated them. We specialize in events that celebrate personal milestones, divorce parties, career achievements, recovery anniversaries, moments when people reclaim their narratives. I'm seeing someone now who introduces me proudly to everyone in his life, who suggests weekend trips with friends rather than hidden getaways, who understands that love should never require erasure. It's still new, still unfolding, but it's built on a foundation I never had with James. Complete visibility. The most profound change isn't in my circumstances, but in my sense of worth. I no longer measure my value through someone else's willingness to acknowledge me. I no longer accept secrecy as a substitute for substance. I no longer mistake intensity for intimacy. This journey from shadow to light wasn't easy. There were days I didn't think I'd survive the pain, nights when I questioned everything I thought I knew about love and worth, moments when going back seemed easier than moving forward. But if you're listening to this and recognizing your own story and mine, if you're hiding in someone's shadow right now, believing that's all you deserve, I need you to hear me. You were never meant to be a secret. Real love doesn't ask you to make yourself smaller. It doesn't thrive in darkness. It doesn't require you to contort yourself into uncomfortable shapes just to hold on to crumbs of affection. You deserve to be chosen completely, not just behind closed doors. You deserve someone who is as proud to stand beside you in daylight as they are to hold you at night. You deserve to take up space in the world, not just in someone's carefully compartmentalized life. The path out of the shadows isn't easy, but I promise you this. It leads to a version of yourself you'll be proud to reclaim. A version that knows her worth isn't determined by someone else's ability to recognize it. If my story resonates with you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to join our community of women reclaiming their narratives. Leave a comment about your own journey from invisibility to wholeness. Because the most powerful thing we can do with our pain is use it to light the way for someone else still finding their path. Someone who, like I once was, is waiting in the shadows for permission to step into their own light. That permission isn't coming from someone else. It can only come from within. And trust me when I say, the light was always yours to claim.